Good morning to everyone. Good morning to those that are online, those that are listening, watching, tuning in from wherever you at in the world. We was international last night on the live stream. Oh yeah, I'm not Lone TP right now. um, Glad you're here, and we're gonna jump right into it. It's Psalm 110. Again, I'm reading out of the Christian Standard Bible. The Bible study author has always a question for us, which is really relevant to what we're going to be looking over. I'm actually glad we're looking at over this psalm. It says, "Why is hope important?" A little bit of plosives there. Why is hope important? What can cause a person to lose hope? We live in a fallen world, oh, intentionally, both internationally and locally. There's constant poverty, strife, injustice, immorality, bloodshed, war, godlessness, and the never ending foreboding of an escalation of all these things. It seems as if everything is out of control, but it is not. God is in control. The day is coming when Jesus will come again, defeat his enemies, and establish his eternal kingdom with those who belong to him. So, why is hope important? Because it helps us get past those things that are happening in the world. Not just like 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 the Bible study author was saying internationally. Man, that's one of the things I hate. Nah, maybe not hate. Hate is a really strong word, and that's what we're talking about here. There's already a lot of hate in the world. I really dislike the usual programming that's on the news channels, because it's news, but typically it's on the negative side of the spectrum more than the positive side. And then not only that, you have, well, what has happened is people people got money and they wanted to create a news station, and then they got the idea, well, we're gonna favor one angle of the news. And there's all kinds of different angles. Like like there's a business channel. There's I don't know, other channels there, and they probably said that at some point they're gonna feature certain stories, right? And then there's other channels that do the same thing, and that's what has happened over the years, is that not only do you have one news channel that has, bad things going on, you have other channels that are talking about other bad things, and so it compounds. And that's typically when you hear about news, right? Unless you're watching intently on your local news channels, you're going to hear about bad things in the world. You're going to hear about this um, poverty, strife, injustice, immorality, bloodshed, war, the godlessness. Uh, Sometimes we don't hear too much about that, except that you see it all the time in the way they talk about stuff. Um, I don't like it too much that the reporting on what's going on in Texas with all the life that's been lost talks and focuses on what they should have done to prepare and other things, like going back and analyzing their decisions. I mean, if you're not going to have a 500-year flood, you're prone to make 10-year decisions instead of 500-year decisions or 1,000-year decisions. And that's the thing, is that they're putting a bad angle on it when it doesn't really need any angle at all. And then we hear about the war and all those types of things. Something that's crazy on the news now is and for us in Oklahoma, I guess the the recreational measure is going to be able to be put on the ballot, and they have to get signatures and all that type of stuff now. I'm not saying certain things and certain practices are wrong, but shouldn't we be focused on other things? That's what we're trying to talk about when we're looking at Psalm 110, is looking forward. So when Jesus came to Bethlehem, his arrival gave birth to fresh hope for God's people who had been waiting for the day when the Messiah would arrive. Messianic hope that sprouted at his birth grew stronger as he passed through the agony of the cross to the glory of the empty tomb. And Jesus lives on, and so does our hope. We affirm Jesus as Messiah. We believe that all authority has been given to him, and we look forward to his return. In keeping with his messianic promise, he will come back one day, but he will come as a conquering king and judge rather than a baby in a manger. He will defeat the enemies of his kingdom once and for all. His victory will be absolutely certain, and his reign will never end. So, picking up in verse 1, Psalm 110, verse 1. This is the declaration of the Lord to my Lord. This is the declaration of the Lord to my Lord. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion. Rule over your surrounding enemies. Your people will volunteer on the day of battle. In holy splendor from the womb of the dawn, the dew of your youth belongs to you. Psalmist David wrote about a resounding declaration made by God. He used the Hebrew title Yahweh to identify God's ultimate authority over everything and everyone. Next, David chose Adonai, my Lord, to represent his own family line that would rule over Israel. Centuries later, Jesus would apply the same divine title to himself as he shed light on his identity as the Messiah. And there's different references in the Gospels there. And David went on to record the actual words God shared as he directed his king to the place of extreme honor and authority at his right hand. In the New Testament, such an honored place belonged only to Jesus as Messiah. Again, more references in the Gospels, but also what Paul and the author of Hebrews wrote. Equally significant, New Testament writers affirm that God's pledge to defeat his Messiah's enemies also pointed to Jesus. As the Messiah's enemies would not be able to stand against him because God would strengthen him. The word picture of an extended scepter portrayed the reach of God's absolute power. His Messiah would establish his reign over all people. The New Testament underscored God's declaration by calling attention to the imminent return and unending reign of Jesus. His royal scepter would be extended from Zion, where God vowed he would live among his people. So when he talks about, when it's referenced that the eternal resting place, right, is not something that was just somewhere. It's where God specifically said he would meet his people. He would provide for them. As David reigned over Israel, he had to defend his kingdom against enemies who lived nearby. The neighboring nations often attempted to conquer Israel, but they did not succeed during the reigns of David or his son Solomon. However, neighboring nations continued to trouble Israel, especially when God's people rejected him and followed false gods. After God's people were exiled to Babylon, Daniel wrote about a vision of the Messiah and the establishment of his perpetual reign over everyone, everywhere. Centuries later, John wrote about a vision of Jesus returning, establishing his kingdom, and defeating his enemies, and that is in Revelations. So even to today, and we could see, maybe his people are not following the straight and narrow, but that goes for all people because it's open to everyone now. The reason that we have strife in the world is because we don't want to turn to Him, and we don't want to help each other. We don't want to love each other. We don't want to sing praise when praise is due, and we don't want to turn away from bad things when it's right there in front of us that's bad for us. The Lord assured David that the kings who followed him would come from his family line. He also promised that his dynasty would never end. Of course, he fulfilled his promise with his Messiah when his Messiah came. The Messiah had a distinct connection with the ancestral line of David. And you can see that in the lineage when it talks about where Jesus came from. Just as David fought against the enemies of the kingdom of Israel, the Messiah would go to war with the enemies of his eternal kingdom. And like David, the Messiah would not face the day of battle alone. His people would join him in the fight and follow his leadership. They would volunteer for the task. Again, talking about the scripture and in Revelations talking about that battle, that spiritual battle that's going to happen, and what's going to be what's in store for us later on is that we're not going to have when we say that every head will bow, everybody will need to, they're going to pledge allegiance and they're going to go to war in that way because he's the one, he's the king, and we're his kingdom. The faithful believers who joined the Messiah would not be portrayed as weak or weary soldiers who had lost interest in battle. Instead, they would step into the conflict in holy splendor. And you can see this in not just war. War is getting intense when it's portrayed in, especially in social media, right? Because there are so many ways that a camera could be brought into the battle now. It wasn't that way in World War II. Your camera was probably as big as your weapon or your backpack or whatever. Now they got these little, they're called GoPros, right? We all know what a GoPro is. We got Insta360 and all this type of stuff. And soldiers don't care. They want to record what they're doing and all that, and then it makes it to the internet. It's crazy. But it's not just happening on the battlefield where people, you can see they're exhausted. They're not into it, right? You can see that in sports competitions. When has anybody ever beat Usain Bolt? Now, but he's not really competing, right? but you would see when he would race, when he was setting records, right? No one even wanted to compete. They knew that they were going to lose. Yeah, and so, and the other, yeah, they see them like, oh, okay. Yeah, I'm gonna try to get second then. Yeah, that's all they race for, second place. Instead of trying to be the best, right? They were trying to be second best, and I always felt like that. I was gonna be on the internet. I always felt like that when people talk about Krista's bread at the Nation, and be like, well, yeah, because she was champion. She's rating. That little competition they had, she was it. So, and that's the way. That's what's going to happen. Well, that's not what's going to. That's the opposite of what's going to happen when when his people go to battle with him, when they step into that realm, they're going to be energized. They're not going to be defeated. They're actually going to obtain victory. That's what they're going for. However, their attire would not necessarily include literal crowns or robes. Instead, their personal glory would be reflected in their imitation of the Messiah and his holiness. The details and the word pictures about the dawn and dew may have been elusive, but they pointed to a clear message. The Messiah's followers would be as plentiful as dewdrops at dawn. Also, they would be marked by youthful traits of energy and eagerness. So when he talks about your people will volunteer on your day of battle in holy splendor from the womb of the dawn, the dew of your youth belongs to you. That's what he's talking about, is they're going to be warriors. When we talk about warriors in our culture, right, you talk about young, energetic people that are not, they don't have any fear, they don't have anything holding them back. They're out there to go to war, go to battle, to go challenge whatever is threatening them, right? Well, that's the image that we should have when we're reading this part right here, is we're not going to be, well, his people that are called to that aren't going to be some slow, always Lord of the Rings, like when they're marching out, it's like it's yeah, they got cute little formations and everything, but they're marching real slow. They're not, and I know it's for energy and all that type of stuff and cinematics, whatever, but when they're headed out, right, it's not like they're gonna be, oh, we're going this is another day, another time, another battle or whatever. This is it. That's what they're claiming is victory. And they're not dressed in those not dressed like kings or like the, I don't know, the Buckingham Palace guards, right? Not like that, but that's what they're going to go claim, is that crown. Verse 4. The Lord has sworn an oath and will not take it back. You are a priest forever according to the pattern of Melchizedek. Yeah, Melchizedek. In ancient Israel, God's people made promises to each other before him, and they punctuated those promises with a sworn vow. Such an oath verified that the individuals would keep their word. In God's relationship with his people, he also swore oaths to them. According to Psalm 89, God made an oath to David regarding the perpetuation of his dynasty. Here in Psalm 110, he made an oath related to the coming Messiah. Regarding the oath God made, he would not take it back. His promise was irrevocable because God cannot fail to keep his word. His promise had been given to his people in keeping with his character. Therefore, he would never make a promise and then fail to keep it. Furthermore, God does not make oaths casually or lightly. Quite the opposite. His oath must be made in accordance with the redemptive plan that he established in eternity. Of course, his eternal plan of salvation centered on the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. Previously, the Lord declared that the Messiah would reign as king. Here, he confirmed that the Messiah will also serve as priest. In the Old Testament, God's people considered the roles of king and priest to be separate. While kings performed the duties of priests on occasion, this was the exception rather than the rule. Like the psalmist, the prophet Zechariah proclaimed that the Messiah would assume both roles. The writer of Hebrews also stated that Jesus served as high priest for believers in keeping with his messianic promise. I like that, in that it even has a current illustration when it's kind of weird sometimes when people get married and they use a justice of the peace. They're literal judges or lawyers that have been recorded as being able to provide those rights. But it doesn't always feel right, you know. And then the flip side of that, right? When you hear judges give opinions, I guess, or when they speak and they talk about being in that spot as placed in authority, when they recognize who actually put them there, right? God, their faith, or whatever. It doesn't, like, well, we're supposed to keep that church and state, all that fun stuff that we learned in grade school and on, right? Separation, yeah, we're, but that's not the case, and that's not the case when we look at Jesus. He is both priest and king. He has both roles, and that's what is being said here. When the Lord led his people out of Egypt and into the wilderness, he commanded Moses to appoint Aaron as the nation's first high priest. He added that Aaron's priesthood would pass on to his sons. So when Aaron died, Moses anointed Aaron's son Eleazar as the new high priest. The succession of high priests through Aaron's family line continued throughout the Old Testament. But only Jesus could play the role of ultimate and eternal high priest. He would make the sacrifice that would provide salvation once and for all. And since God raised him from the dead, he would live on forever and never need to be replaced like Aaron's sons. So, let's see here. It depends on your guys' translation. Holman Christian says, forever you are priest of Melchizedek. But in here it says, you are a priest forever according to the pattern of Melchizedek. So, again, this is out of the Christian Standard Bible that we're reading it from the Bible study. It says the pattern, according to Israel's history, priests provided an absolute invaluable service. They went to the Lord on behalf of his people, and they went to his people on his behalf. The high priest in Aaron's family line took responsibility for carrying out those critical duties. Their succession set up a pattern that the Israelites understood and affirmed. Now the Lord declared that the Messiah would establish a unique pattern as high priest. A king as well as a priest, Melchizedek appeared during the days of Abraham. His name meant King of Righteousness, and he ruled over Salem, which can be translated City of Peace. When he appeared, he blessed Abraham. In turn, Abraham presented a tithe to him. Scripture does not mention a predecessor or a successor to Melchizedek as king and priest. However, God declared that he provided the perfect pattern for the Messiah as the eternal king priest for believers. And again, references to Hebrews. And then moving on, it says, picking up in verse 5, the Lord is at your right hand. He will crush kings on the day of his anger. He will judge the nations, heaping up corpses. He will crush leaders over the entire world. He will drink from the brook by the road. Therefore, he will lift up his head. A reference to right hand appeared earlier in verse 1. There, God placed the Messiah in a position of highest honor. Now, God used the expression to assure the Messiah that his mission would be successful. God had crowned him as king. Then he vowed that the Messiah would also serve as priest. The combination of those roles underscored God's faithful devotion to the Messiah's mission. Centuries later, Stephen provided convicting evidence of God's faithfulness. Just before his death as a martyr, he testified that he actually saw Jesus standing at God's right hand. God looked ahead to the time when the Messiah would take his stand and crush his enemies. On that day, he would defeat them once and for all. The Old Testament prophets declared that the day of his anger was a certainty. Of course, that day will be fulfilled when Jesus returns. It would be marked by fierce warfare that would end with the absolute obliteration of the Messiah's enemies. Accountability would not end with utter defeat. It would also include judgment. The Messiah would not return only to crush his enemies, but also to judge their hostile actions and willful rebellion against him. Nations full of people who turned away from God would not escape his judgments. And Jesus spoke to his disciples about the day of judgment when he taught about the separation of sheep and goats. Paul also declared a solemn warning about the day of the Lord's judgment that would come, again in Romans. The psalmist's description of the scene on the field of battle left nothing to the imagination. The image of corpses piled up after battle spoke volumes about the extent of the destruction. The Messiah's enemies would come from every nation in the world, but he would crush their leaders. This image carries the idea of shattering their bodies. By the time the battle ends, not even one opponent will be left to stand against the victorious Messiah. John himself presented a similar description of Jesus' complete victory when he returns in Revelations. While the imagery might seem violent, readers must remember that God is not being gratuitous. Jesus, the Messiah, will judge in righteousness, but he will judge those who reject him. When talk about complete and utter destruction, there was a couple Royal Rumbles that I remember, and it was crazy because there was like, I don't know, they tried to fit like 40 people in that ring, and it wasn't. Can't hold. They must have reinforced it or something. There's a lot of meat in there. But they started falling, right? Just seeing them all over and everything. And I always get that in my head when they're talking about the one who wins, right? Had to go past all that, and they didn't stop until they were champion. That's the image that he's trying to paint for us. A Royal Rumble, yeah, but a battlefield, right? When they talk about the I don't know, talking festivities, the remembering of D-Day on the beaches, in the landing zones and all that. You know, there were literal piles of people who gave their life, both sides. And so, I think they said the sea turned red. There was so much blood. So, and that's the image. That's that we can just get a glimpse at how what it's going to look like, because a lot of us, right, have a lot of those things there, but there are also others that take it further, that actually rebel against him, right? And they're the ones that are going to be fighting him. They're the ones that are going to try to take battle to him, to show him that he's wrong and he's not. And that's what's going to happen. Is it's going to be utter destruction. Throughout the Old Testament, drinking water from a brook or stream carries the idea of being refreshed and renewed. For example, in the account of Gideon, the Lord instructed him to choose troops based on the way they drank water from a spring. In 1 Kings, the Lord sent Elijah to hide himself at Wadi Cherith, near the Jordan River, a brook. He instructed Elijah to drink water from the wadi. After the battle with his enemies, the Messiah would be refreshed by taking a drink from nearby streams. The monumental difference between the Messiah and his enemies became most evident in the aftermath of the battle. While the heads of his enemies will be crushed completely, he can lift up his head in triumph. Lifting up one's head signified victory, power, and resolve. The Messiah will not leave any loose ends. Nothing will go undone, and no promise will be broken. Just as Jesus accomplished the Father's plan perfectly on the cross, he will fulfill the Father's purposes when he comes back to judge the unrighteous. That's what he talks about at that last I don't even call it stanza, that last sentence in the verse in 7. He will drink from the brook by the road, therefore he will lift up his head. And I don't know if you guys catch it. I always catch it when there's a challenge in a movie, when there's strife going on. That's actually a movie technique for the actors. They train on that, and it's that last moment when they see that they've completed whatever task or whatever. You could go any movie, and it's that motion when they rise up. Be Rocky, right, from after his fight. Any of those scenes, and they have war. I can't remember if it's Fury or another war movie or something, but there's a soldier, and he's looking around, and he sees that he's done. He can't accomplish any more with what he's doing, and that's that motion. That's what they're trying to show. Or that's what the psalmist is describing here. At the end of the battle, he's the one that's going to be able to look across the battlefield and be able to claim victory, be able to keep his head up, right, where everybody else is defeated. So. Your story? Hey. I got it now. When you're like that. Hey. No, that's what it is, because that's, if you go away in defeat, right? You have that. You're like, yeah, you're not exactly right when you can keep your chin up, right? It's not pride. It's fulfillment, and that's what it's that deep breath. What he's talking about, that refreshing drink of the water of the streams. So that's what the Lord is gonna be able to show us when He returns, is that it's complete, it's done, and we're gonna go on. And that's the hope that we have to look forward to, right? That's why it's not. That's why what going back to the Bible study author's question for us, says, if I can get back to it, why is hope important? So what can cause a person to lose hope? Well, the fact that there is nothing ahead of us, and that's what God has promised us, is that there is something certainty. There's certainly something ahead of us. There's something certainly to fight for and to look forward to. So it's good. He's gonna come back, and he's not gonna just come back and just chill. He's gonna defeat his enemies. He's gonna set the world right. He's gonna give us a better eternal life. That's something to look forward to. So, any questions, comments, rude remarks? Preacher, get here on time. Yeah, I know. I'm tired a little bit. I know. I couldn't read my screen. Oh, I don't know. It was like one. No, I can't remember. Yeah, I think it was like one. And I got back home like two, something like that. So, yeah. All right. Brother Chris, would you get us ready for service? Dismiss us from Sunday school.